What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts with Nick. Today, I have a guest that I'm really excited to interview. He has a really remarkable story from struggles with addiction to the level that he's been able to rise to today. It's truly remarkable. Before getting into his story, though, as always, we're going to start with the quote. Today's quote comes from Maya Angelou, and what she said was, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." And Mike has quite the story to share. Before we get into your recovery story, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about your background and who you are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and I appreciate you, bringing me in. Anytime that I can talk about my journey to recovery is always a positive thing for me. And try to connect with anybody who's out there struggling with an addiction. My background is, my family background I have a really supporting family. I got two great parents that I grew up with, and three great sisters, and we bounced around a little bit. We lived in out west and in Utah and California before we kind of moved in here to the Westchester area, and we've been here in Westchester for quite some time now. Yeah,
Okay.
so we've been in here Westchester probably a good 40 some years now. So
Okay.
yeah, local to the area. Yeah.
So, what about professional background? What kind of jobs have you worked throughout your life? What's that side of your life looked like?
Yeah, I started my career really, my family were police officers, so that was really what I was gravitating towards. And I kind of started in that career, and I realized kind of at a younger age that that's not really what I wanted to pursue. I was one of the cops that let everybody go. And I don't think that was what people were looking for at that time. And then, so that really kind of turned me into a different direction, and I got into security type of work, and then I got into international security work, and I worked for some firms, some big, large companies doing physical security type of work, and then I went into another direction and did a lot of travel risk mitigation type of security. And then for my last 10 years in the world that I worked in, I was a professional bodyguard. So I worked as an executive protection agent for a firm, and we did diplomatic details from Philadelphia to DC. And I've had a long run in the security world. Yeah,
That sounds like a pretty interesting and kind of all over the place type job. Sounds like you could have been in countless different scenarios on a given day potentially.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was very interesting, and I really loved that job, or loved those jobs. It exposed me to a lot of different clientele, exposed me to, an international world of traveling, and I got to travel the world, and I got to see a lot of great things, and it was a really very, very interesting career. I'm very proud of some of the people and the colleagues that I've got to meet and still friends with today.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for providing a little bit of a background and introduction into yourself. So
Yeah.
now I think it makes sense to kind of start at the beginning. So I'm curious, where did your relationship with substances and substance use begin?
I tell people a lot that I think that, for me, I kind of think of that I was an alcoholic, or I struggled even before I picked up my first drink, right? I had a lot of issues and I can't say like between trauma and environmental or genetic or whatever that is. And, but I look at addiction for me is I just never felt comfortable. I never felt good enough. I had all these deep sensitivities, and when I picked up my first drink at 14 years old, a lot of those voices quieted for me, and I kind of found my solution. And so I ran with that solution for a very long time until I would eventually start to burn my life down. I still remember my first drink. I stole a bottle from my sister's, a bottle of vodka from my sister's wedding when I was 14 years old. I went outside with my friends and a couple of girls, and we drank it, and I got sick, and I got in a lot of trouble. And for most people, that would be the end of it. But for me, that was just really the fire that started everything for me. And it was, I just, like I said, I just continued down that road, and that really progressed through my adolescence, and I progressed through my college, where when I went to college, I thought it was kind of a rite of passage to do drugs and drinking. And, but I was also the king of slowing down when I needed something or I wanted something like a job or something, in my life. So I could manage it for a while until, later in my life, that's when things really started to progressively get out of control. And the one thing I do, I know a lot about addiction, but the thing about it is it's very patient and it waits for you, and it certainly waited for me. And my addiction really, I really started to struggle when I was in my 40s. That's when things really started to turn for me. So.
Okay, so you mentioned things starting to turn in your 40s. I'm curious, I guess, what exactly that looked like and what some of the personal consequences were, whether it was work or just relationships with family, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, definitely all the above. Addiction really takes away the intimacies you have in your life. And that's, I always say to people, there was consequences when I was younger, but they were smaller consequences. I remember in high school getting kicked off a baseball team or getting bad grades. But I always kind of tell people that even back then, my addiction was starting to take over, right? And for me, what happened is I never really got to figure out who I was. You know what I mean? So I gravitated to jobs and roles that I thought would make me feel, important, and it worked for a while. But to get back to your question, Nick, is, I had, my relationships. A lot of my relationships, would just started to kind of deteriorate, right? So I was, I was married when I first went into rehab, and those were the things that my family, my friends, and everybody else, that could see me struggling, and unfortunately, sometimes we're the last ones to recognize that. And so that's how things started to progress for me in my 40s. And
So when you mentioned some of those relationship difficulties, was that due to prioritization of engagement with your substance of choice, or what exactly led to that?
Well, I think, for what led to that is, this feeling of not feeling comfortable, and booze for some reason would relax me and slow me down, and until it started really, destroying some of those things that were very important to me in my life. And, I couldn't really see them. You know what I mean? Like I had a really nice wife, and we had a beautiful daughter, in my 40s in this time frame, and but I was just still trying to escape some of these things,
So it's just kind of a thing where you didn't feel comfortable in your own skin, despite what seemed great from the outside looking in. Someone else looking at your life, they might say, wow, Mike's got it all going for him. But then on the inside, you just never kind of felt that. You were never able to actualize or perceive it in that way.
No.
I think that's very relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's why they turn to substances, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah. The thing about it is I had this beautiful house, beautiful wife, nice, a new baby at the time. I was making great money. I was traveling the world. I had a lot of good things in front of me, but I just couldn't see them. And I kept trying to escape from some of those things for some specific reason. And it's really until I got into, and we're going to talk a little bit about, my history of trying to get sober, and those kind of things. It took me a long time to finally start to figure out the reasons why I continue to want to escape my life.
Okay.
And that took a lot of work and a lot of effort, so yeah.
Like I said, I do think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and why they turn to substances, almost like escapism of sorts, just to feel something different from the burden of everyday monotony, or like you mentioned, just not really resonating with who you are at a certain point in time, right? So I guess the next place to go would be some of the struggles of your addiction. But before we touch on that, just to confirm, you struggled with alcohol?
I struggled with pretty much everything. I mean, my drug of choice was definitely alcohol, right? But when I was growing up, it was weed, it was cocaine, it was ecstasy. There was, I think I tried every drug possible. You know what I mean? But alcohol for me was probably the number one thing. That was my kind of go-to.
I gotcha.
Yeah. And even when I was, alcohol also fueled my other addictions as well, right? And that could have been any other different substances.
It's almost like a catalyst. It just opened the door.
It just opened the door. So, if I was drinking, I would be up for anything,
I gotcha.
Yeah.
So next, if you're comfortable, I want to discuss some of the rough times in your addiction and what that looked like.
You mean some of my darker days?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, some of my darker days. I've written a book about some of my darker days and my process of getting into recovery. When I think of one of the darkest days for me is that I woke up in jail, and I don't really remember what happened for those couple days before. And obviously I had been in security and I had security clearances and all these things. And I knew right away when I woke up in jail that my life was going to be over because I was going to lose my job, basically. And, that was a really dark day for me, but it actually got worse. I remember getting released from that jail. Of course, I didn't go home. I went. The only place that I know was a bar, and I sat there that day and drank vodka after vodka, and I got a text from my boss, and they terminated me because I hadn't been there for 3 days, and then from there I just kind of continued to drink. I wanted my life to end, and I ran into a friend that night, and I went over to his house, and we drank until late night. I remember waking up in the morning pissed off that I was still alive because I just wanted to drink myself to death. And I left his house. I Ubered to a supermarket at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I walked into the Acme and grabbed a bottle of wine, and I walked into the bathroom and I drank that bottle of wine within 8 minutes or 10 minutes. And I walked outside. It was a really nice, beautiful September day and outside of Philadelphia. And I sat outside and I didn't notice the cop cruiser that was coming by. And within 10 minutes, the cop confronted me and I was arrested again. So literally within 20 to 24 hours of being released from prison, or jail, I was right back into it. And then that really, but I just lost my will to live, and that is which I write about in my book. And then from there, I still struggled. It took me a long time to finally to surrender. But those months after that, I went to rehab, and a couple other things happened between there, but that was one of the darker days. But certainly in my writing, there's darker moments that I had to go through. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. I know it can be tough sometimes to discuss the.
It's not really that. It's not hard for me because I've written everything down. So it doesn't, I've come to accept it, and I recover out loud and tell people this is what happened to me. And my book is really about my vulnerability to be honest in my life, and so that somebody can kind of raise their hand and maybe relate to some of the things that they have done. And so it's for me it like I said, it's what I do. It's what I talk about. I mean, some of the bad things happened to me that I put myself through also brought to me the person I'm supposed to be today as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of relates back to the quote too about the pain of having an untold story within yourself. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you tell the story, and in your book as well, is that almost like catharsis for you, like an emotional release, just kind of like to get it out there? You kind of it sounds like yes, but I want to ask you rather than assuming.
Yeah, I mean, it was, when I was going through all these things, I released this book about a year and a half ago, but I was, I've got years of sobriety now, but I also have, when I was going through all this stuff, I had this idea that I needed to continue to write, and I didn't really enjoy writing. I just started to write it because one of the things that I was trying to tell people what it's like, and when you're talking to somebody one-on-one, it's a little bit harder to say all these things that are going on in your head. And I think people were tired of my shit too, like just hearing the same stuff. So I needed to really write that down. And as I've talked about, I started to figure out a lot of these things in my life, and these angelical angels that were kind of steering me in the right direction my whole life. And by writing that down, I kind of started to see that. So, and then from really in the middle of this story, I realized the story wasn't about me, it was about us. It was about all the family, my friends, and everybody else that I had. So, I do a lot of work with this book and do a lot of donations with the book as well to help the next
Awesome.
person. To help the next person.
So that was kind of your inspiration and motivation then for writing the book, is some of the difficulties of one-to-one conversation, sharing your experience. You felt like it would translate better into a written form where someone can digest your experience rather than hearing it from you first.
Yeah, I mean, and there was so much of it too, right? There were so many stories, there were so many things. I mean, the book starts off with two cops knocking on my front door, right? And it kind of starts off that way, and it talks about all the steps that I had to go through rehab, and then getting sober for a while, and then screwing things up again, and getting sober, and then rebuilding again over and over again. But to get back to your point is, yeah, it was just this flow process, and in a way, I talk about, it was the first time in my life that I was honest. Like, there was no more bullshit. There was like, I'm gonna put this out there. And it was funny because when I was near the end of writing this book, I had given it to a couple of friends, and they were like, "Are you out of your mind to write this stuff down?" And I knew at that time, I knew I was on the right path, because I knew that the story was honest and truthful, and there wasn't any other, there was no bullshit there. It was like, here it is, black and white.
Yeah, and
right.
I think there's something really powerful about that, kind of like, not necessarily in the sense of like full disclosure, but kind of like you mentioned before about being vulnerable with your experience, the goods, the bads, and it just, as you mentioned as well, allows other people to take something from your experience and really learn from it. So I guess now would be a good time to kind of show your book. So we got Mike right here on the cover, Lost in London, A Journey from Insanity to Acceptance. And I've seen it's been well received, so congratulations for that. It's a great accomplishment, and
Thank you.
something truly to be proud of, writing your experience. And just from picking it up, I could see you got a couple hundred pages there. So yeah.
Well, it's so funny because we started off and I think I had like 100,000 words, and I remember being broke at the time because I had lost all my stuff. I had lost my job, and I was just rebuilding my life, and I didn't have any money to get to an editor. And finally I scraped up like a couple $1,000, and I remember being like, okay, I sent it off to 3 editors. And I was like, well, I'm going to see who's going to be the cheapest, right? And all the editors came back and say, we really liked your story. And then from there, they took it from almost like 100,000 words, and we got it down to about 87,000 words.
Okay.
So that was really helpful. That's when things really started to come into place there.
Okay. Something else that you touched on in there was the long journey to get sober. The losses, the repeated setbacks, and What was it that ultimately led to the final change that allowed you to get to this place that you're in today?
So yeah, great question. So my history was this, and my history was, in 2011, I stepped into my first rehab, and I went to the Caron Foundation, and I thought I was building this foundation of recovery, and I remember walking out of there, and my daughter and my wife at the time were waiting for me. I had just done my 30 days, and I thought my life was going to start again. But recovery takes a lot of work, and I just wasn't. I just didn't do the work. So there's a big difference between being sober, sobriety, and recovery, and I'll kind of explain that to you. So being sober is basically getting the substances out of your body, and technically in 4 or 5 days you can get the substances out of your body. You are technically sober, but a lot of the times you're still the same version of yourself. And I was still the same version of myself. I still had those struggles of not feeling, comparing my life to everybody else, and not feeling comfortable, and not feeling good enough, and these deep sensitivities. So even though that I had removed the booze, right, I was still the same guy. I still had the same behaviors that I was going through. I just didn't have my solution there, which is alcohol at that time, or drugs, to soothe those voices for me. So that took me a good 10 years. So like I said earlier, I'd kind of go in those patterns, or I'd stay sober for 2 or 3 years, and then I'd drink again, and I'd screw something up. And so when I started my last recovery is, when I was really at the end of it, I was at the bottom of like the barrel of my life. I had, it was a very dark time, which I talk about. It was a time that I wanted to end my life. And then finally I remember going to my last rehab, and I went to church. I went to this Baptist church. And this black woman took me to this church, and I did not blend very well. And I had just had it. And I remember getting on my knees thinking, not out of like tradition, out of fear, but out of complete surrender. Like I just surrendered and said, okay, I can't do this by myself any longer. Because I always was like half in and half out of it. You know what I mean? I told everybody I was doing the work. I told you I was going to the meetings. I just never did any of the work. And recovery is, for me, that's the difference. Sobriety gives you that capability of starting to uncover those behaviors. When you start to realize, okay, like I suffer with this, I had some of these issues. Once I started to identify them, I could start changing my behaviors around them. But when I was just not drinking, I wasn't addressing any of that shit, right? And then recovery today for me is really about doing the next right thing and being involved and helping the next person that struggled, right? So there's a big difference for me in those categories.
And when you talk about doing the next right thing and helping the next person out there, I think that leads well into what you've created with Just Today. So just to introduce it to everyone out there, Mike has a brand as well as a podcast called Just Today. And I'd like you to explain the meaning of Just Today, what type of content and services that you provide through that.
Yeah, so this started, I think, really, it started when I started to release my book because, as I said, portions of my book proceeds go to supporting organizations. So I've been able to provide charitable donations to the Caron Foundation, and the crazy thing about it is the Caron Foundation actually put my book into their book catalog, which was a nice honor. But I've also done work with the Heron Project, and also done some work with Angels Against Addiction, and we've been able to provide donations to them, and I continue to do that to this day. But to get back to your question, Nick, is Just Today, we started off because I was like, okay, I need to promote a book a little bit, and I had no social media, whatever. So we started to look at how we could promote like these things, and I kind of started this little podcast. And it was really me about explaining my story. And then from there, just like my book, I was like, well, I want other people on my podcast. So it gives them the opportunity, because I've already told you all my stuff. So it gives people the other opportunities to get on and share their recovery journey as well.
Okay.
So that's been really cool. And so we continue to do that. And it's not just about recovery stories. We also are moving into doing more things about educational prevention, harm reduction, all these other things. And people love to hear the stories. I love hearing the stories as well, but we also kind of continue to educate those individuals. And then from there, we've got into some branding with some shirts and things like that. And we kind of continue on that and trying to continue to develop new channels to create more awareness around recovery. And because there had been so many people that helped me along my journey that I'm very involved in it. I mean, I got very, very involved in the recovery side of things.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I think that's a really incredible platform that you're providing, and I'm sure there's going to be a great deal of people that will reap the benefits just from hearing other stories and the overlap to their own lives in terms of, mistakes that they hear other people made, that maybe they've been in similar positions or they're going to be in similar positions, and instead of falling into those same traps, they can say, okay, I know where this leads for someone in my shoes, so just an increased level of awareness, and I think that's really going to go a long way. So I commend you for that.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's a labor of love for sure. It's not like we make any money doing it. It's really a lot about the educational side. I do love that. I mean, it gives the individuals that come down and sit down with me on my podcast, it gives them the opportunity to share their story with their family and friends, just like I've shared my book. Right. And they, and I've had some really wonderful connections from there. And that's what's been such the biggest blessing in my life is that, I never could see that stuff before. I was in my own fog, and today I'm truly who I'm supposed to be. And it's cool to be able to to make sure that you're reaching out and you're connecting with somebody else. It's a very powerful thing, so.
Right there, you just hit on precisely what I wanted to ask with my next question. You said you feel like today you're who you're truly supposed to be. And that's really something that I wanted to ask you today is, how does it feel? It must be quite incredible and honestly unbelievable when you look back at your life to see how far you've come and what you've been able to achieve since sobriety. Writing a book, starting this platform, all of those things, it's almost a total reinvention of yourself. So I'm curious, what does that feel like for you?
It's still hard. No, I still think it's, I'm very grateful. I got to the place when I talked to you about being in that church and getting on my knees and, realizing that I couldn't do it by myself any longer. And I asked God for one more chance. And I'll never forget that. It's something I think about every day. Like, just give me one more chance and lead me into the path that you want me to be, not Mike's path all the time. And so for me, it's just a real blessing that I have the capabilities to do that. Like, the book is done well. It's nice. It's a nice foundation, but I just continue to, do more things. And it's just, I really love it. It's become my passion in my life. Like, it's cool when you finally find your own path, and that's the really cool thing about it. But it drives my fiance nuts at times, because she's like, I work hard on it. Definitely work hard, and we do a lot of work, not even just from the podcast, but I help men and coach them through some of the things that they've got to go through as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one more thing I want to touch on regarding the book is, you mentioned your draft. You had over 100,000 words. I want to know what the process was like actually writing the book, and some of the places that's taken you. I know you mentioned some of the donations that you do and whatnot.
Yeah.
But just if you can outline that a little bit.
Well, the writing the book process, is that what you?
Yeah,
Okay.
first the actual writing process, and then where it's taken you since publication. So kind of a two-parter.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, I got to tell you, when I was writing this book, I had started it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I had kind of put some things together, and it's like I actually thought I had a lot of information in the book, and then that's when my life started to fall apart again, and all these things of me getting arrested and all this other stuff, and when I got out, kind of. I was on house arrest for a certain amount of time. I mean, I had a lot of things legally that I had to deal with. And, I had lost my job and I was sitting around my house. I was losing all my money. And, I would come home at night and I just continued to write. And that it was very emotional. When you read this book, there's just a lot of raw emotions in the book. There was a lot of nights that it was just tears and crying and going through it, and and I kind of think, like I said, I was doing it all myself, and then I had a friend who would come over and he would read a chapter and say, "This sucks" or "This is good," and then I would kind of like move through it, and it was before I even had like AI capability. So I was doing all this other shit myself.
Yeah.
And, so it was a lot of work. It was tons of work. And then, from there it just started to, like I said, I told you the story about the editing piece. Like I saved like $2,000. I remember like having $2,000. I was like, okay, I got $2,000. Like, but it was, and then just kind of started moving from there. Yeah.
And what kind of places has it taken you to?
Has it taken me to? Well, it's taken me. I don't think about places. I think about the
opportunities.
It's more of the connections that I've made.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it was really nice that I remember going to the Karen breakfast meeting one time, maybe a year and a half ago. My book was first launched, and I remember giving it to like 3 or 4 people there, saying, "Hey, I'd appreciate it if you could read it and give me feedback." And then, I didn't hear anything for like 2 months. And then this woman reached out to me from Karen, and she says, "I need to have breakfast with you. Like, let's have some coffee. I just read your book. It really kind of blew me away." And so that snowballed into some of the things, my relationships with Karen, and then she introduced me to some other people, but. And then that helps me with my speaking, because I do a lot of speaking engagements now.
Okay.
I talk about my story, and that's kind of my next piece, is to really start crafting some of my speaking, not just at recovery centers, but some more motivational speaking things for me. So yeah.
And does that align with some of your future goals as far as Just Today, more speaking events, or what direction are you looking to move in with Just Today?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is because I feel like I have the book, you have the podcast. I'm very active in the community of recovery, and but I also, the speaking pieces for me is just more about connections. I just did a speaking engagement at a Common Ground, the recovery night, up actually in Reading. It was kind of connected with Karen, but there's 200 people there that that I can connect with, and that's what I want to continue to do, So, and it's amazing. I that's one of the biggest things that I love, is that somebody just sends me an email or say, hey, they want to talk to me for 15 minutes, and I take anybody's calls. And I'll spend, half an hour with you, and and help you navigate through some of your journey if you need that. So that's why I'm here, So.
All right, well, I think that's a great opportunity that you offer to other people, your time, at a phone call. That's
just to reach out to me. You'd be surprised though. It's like people, I wish people reached out more. I really do. I wish people would reach out more. My book is about that vulnerability, and as I mentioned before, about getting honest in our lives and kind of raising your hand and saying, I've had enough of this path that I'm going on to. But you can replace an addiction or recovery for many different things. I think that's what resonates with me. We all have our difficulties in life, right? We all have our trials and tribulations in our lives, you know, and then it doesn't just have to be specifically on an addiction. It could be any struggles that we're having, you know. So I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people too, because it gets into some of those things, right? How we chase like shiny objects in our lives, you know. It's like
Absolutely.
one of the things that what I realized when I started to get into this is that even if I wasn't drinking, I was still chasing shiny objects in my life to fill this thing up in me that was going to make me feel better. Whether
Novelty, right?
Right, like a career, status, chasing women, all these things that I thought would make me feel whole. I end up just destroying all those things, you know. So
Yeah, not to get off track, but that your experience, especially what you mentioned right there, really aligns with something I talked about recently, which was novelty and the mundane. I think a lot of people seek novelty on a daily basis, and that's why they turn to things, whether it be alcohol, weed, you know, whatever the case may be. Even something like junk food or energy drinks is a deviation from the daily normal life routine and whatnot. So
right.
I think that's probably relatable, even if it isn't someone who might be battling addiction. They can probably relate to what you're saying about chasing shiny objects if they're honest and truly reflect on their own life.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you manage to stay in recovery today?
You know, it's mind, body, and soul for me, right? Like when especially when I'm working with somebody, I talk to them a lot about, you know, the first thing is the mind, right? Like, you know, one of the things that I work with on every day is that I still struggle with these intrusive thoughts in my mind sometimes, that I still don't feel good enough, and I still compare my life to other people, and I'm like, why don't I have a boat, and why don't I have this, or what, you know what I mean? That's just that's just the part that I have to struggle with. But so I've been able to kind of identify that I have to work on those every day. I have to stay grounded. I have to not think forward thoughts all the time, because I have forward thinking and past thinking, right? I'm always looking in the rearview mirror of like my screw ups or whatever. It's really focusing on that one day at a time for me. And then, you know, the body part, right? Like I met you at work, working out at the gym, right? I do that every day because that's an important piece for me to physically feel better. It releases these endorphins. You know, and then the soul part is I have to connect with some of the other people, like every day. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a recovery program, though I do a lot of work in recovery. It can just be going to church. It could be connection beyond myself, right?
I gotcha.
And that's whatever higher power you want in your life. But to connect something above yourself, trying to focus on that every day helps. But the other thing is that, you know, my story is that I was always on the outside of shit. Like I never got involved in it. Like I was just like, and when I made that step to realize and turn my life over to recovery, that this had to be the number one priority, you know, I went back to school. I'm a certified recovery specialist. I'm a certified recovery family specialist. I'm on the board of the Drug and Alcohol Services in Chester County. I do a podcast. I do speaking engagements. You know, I do book stuff. Like I do it every day because I have to. You know what I mean? And that's how I stay in recovery every day.
You really live it and embody it.
Yeah. There's like the other side's not that good for me.
I gotcha.
You know?
So earlier you mentioned you have a daughter. I'm curious what your relationship with her is like today.
It's good. I mean, you know, I tell people, you know, when I was struggling with this, my daughter's, you know, 19 years old now. But, you know, she kind of knew her dad as like, you know, going to the hospital and, you know, for 30 days and then coming out, and he would be fine for three or, you know, a couple of years, whatever it was. And then I would kind of snowball at it again, you know. And I think when I got divorced from my wife, and she was only 6 or 7 years old, and that was me chasing another shiny object in my life again, and that kind of destroyed my marriage. And I didn't see it at the time, but I lost the ability to be a dad. I'm still her father, but there's a big difference between being a dad and a father. And that took some time for me to get back some of the trust with my daughter. So, I've got years in sobriety, but my daughter and I have a great relationship today, like really good. She's a senior in college, and she's doing really well, and she knows how hard I work in the recovery. She knows about the book. She knows all the things that I do, and she follows me on Instagram and TikTok, and she sees all the videos that I'm doing in my life. So I think she's proud of me. She doesn't really say it, but I think she's proud of the man that I've become. You know what I mean? And so that's very rewarding for me. And just being a dad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And I think the final thing that I want to close with today is any advice or recommendations for anyone out there who's hearing this, who is either struggling with addiction or maybe potentially denying their own problem. They might be on the verge of addiction or whatever the case may be, but they're kind of in that position you described before, where you're stuck in your own fog and you can't quite see everything that's going on around you, whether that be the good things you have in your life or an actual acknowledgement of your own struggle.
Yeah,
I know I said a lot there.
No, it's fine. I totally understand that. One of the things I say is that recovery is possible, right? And from a guy who's sitting here today, right, and from a guy who lost everything, who lost all his money, who was sitting in jail, who didn't want to live, asking for one more chance, recovery is possible. And one of the things that I talk to people about is that for the longest time, I thought I had to handle this shit myself. And there's communities out there. You can't isolate from, you have to take that first step. And I know it's hard and uncomfortable, and but those are the communities that are going to help you through. And you're not alone. You're not so special that you can manage this yourself. People need help. They need a helping hand. And if you are struggling with that, there's so many great things on the other side of that. You just have to give yourself that opportunity, put your hand out, and ask for help. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. One more time, why don't you show the viewers your book and just give them a little reminder on where they can find you?
Okay. This is the book. It's called Lost in London, A Journey from Insanity to Acceptance. I'll put some of the information on your
we'll
site.
definitely put it in the description for this video.
You can get it on Amazon. I prefer you going through a company called Book Baby, which is my local publisher. Again, it's called Book Baby, and I'll provide you guys with all the discounts on there. And within Book Baby, they help me support the donational side. Amazon takes everything, but with Book Baby, they really work with me. So if you would consider looking at that, that would be great. You can reach out to me. I'll give you all my contact information. You want to have a conversation, just send me an email. I'll talk to anybody.
All right. Well, that sounds great, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in.